Okay, so we're back from running away from the lawnmowers that you may or may not have heard there. So we're talking about kind of what the system's going to be used for, what kind of load it's going to be under, because that's going to dictate, you know, memory, CPU cooler, motherboard. So what kind of things is it primarily going to be used for?
So again, besides Minecraft for the kids, there will be some video recording as I try and teach the kids about recording Minecraft videos and how you go about doing that type of stuff. A little bit of 3D modeling, not really for animation's sake, but for trying out 3D printing. And then some video editing as well. So those are probably the three main use cases.
So when you guys like the video editing and the like the Minecraft videos, do you edit them and re-render them, or? So
at this point, I mean, everything has been as simple as Microsoft Movie Maker just to put it out onto YouTube. But I'm looking to actually get the Adobe product suite for him, so that he can, my oldest son, so that he can actually start cutting them up, perhaps do two videos on two different machines, and then actually mix them together and actually start to learn a little bit more about true video editing and that kind of the next step that goes into it. So
that's one thing, guys. Whenever you're designing a computer for somebody, remember that they're going to use it for multiple years and probably progress in the functionality of that machine. So somebody may be a novice user now and maybe using it for novice things, but you don't want to shoehorn them into something a year or three down the road that's not going to work for them. So like when I hear somebody say, Adobe Premiere or rendering, the first thing I think is, you want something with cores. I actually do most of my editing on a 3370K i7 overclocked, and I have an NVIDIA card. But with OpenCL, so we'll kind of roll this into the next topic, because when you start talking about video editing, we have to start talking about OpenGL versus CUDA cores. So do you have a preference on which graphics technology?
Quite honestly, I don't. Nothing that would be based in reality. Only, because I've used it before.
And this is where, so on a $1,000 PC, you're not going to put a $600 GTX 780 in it, right? Which is going to render huge videos in minutes because it has over 2,000 CUDA cores and 3 gigs of RAM. So when I start hearing stuff like this, I start thinking AMD products, just because even though logically a i7 looks like an 8-core, it's really not. It's a 4-core with hyper-threading, so you get about 18% on those hyper-threads versus a normal core. But when you're talking about, rendering is highly multi-threaded. So is, video editing, anything where it can start taking up multiple cores. And price point, when you start talking some of the 8350s and newer AMD black parts, you get better performance for price, but you pay in heat. So, when you're thinking about that, you might have to put a nicer, you're going to save money on the processor, but you might have to put a nicer CPU cooler on there to keep it at the same temperatures and keep it at the same noise volume. But I think, long term, if you're not playing, high-end AAA titles at, 2560 by 1440, 60, you want 60 frames a second, you have like SLI video cards in there, and when do you buy Intel just because you're an Intel fanboy? By the way, all of you that are hating me right now for wanting to buy an AMD product, go ahead and press dislike down below. And then you can all go to hell because you're Intel fanboys. I am not an AMD fanboy. As you guys know, I think a strong AMD makes a strong Intel, and it's good for consumers, because one point of sales is never good for anybody. As you can see with Intel now shifting completely almost to low wattage parts. So what I would say is, we could do one of two things. So you can go with an FX series part, which means you're locked into a discrete graphics card. Or you can do one of the FM2, the A series AMD parts, which has you know, some GPU, so it's an APU, so it has, you know, GPU and CPU on the same part. The A10s are pretty good. However, I think long term, especially when you start talking Adobe, like the GPU part someday will buy you something in Adobe, but I think just from the fact that you're probably going to put, you know, a couple $100 video card in this machine, that you don't want to go with an APU that is going to lock you in on cores. You know, you want to get one of the higher frequency, you know, dedicated CPUs, because you're probably going to shift, you know, it's going to shift the majority of the code off to the discrete graphics card to do its rendering. They are working on being able to share, especially if you have two AMD parts and OpenCL on both. Adobe is putting in new stuff all the time so that you can share the GPU on both parts. But I think, you know, cost-wise and functionality-wise, if you're going to put a high-end discrete graphics card in something, you're only going to get that GPU sharing on things that really use both independently, right? So there is like this, you know, crossfire-ish thing with the APUs, but you have to buy specific video cards, and they're not very high-end video cards, and then you know, as everybody knows, there's some frame pacing stuff going on with AMD parts right now when you have multiple. But I do think, you know, the AMD parts are the better value. The motherboard prices are all about the same, and that's where. So I think you're okay with. You know, I'll obviously, guys, when you're done talking to somebody, you write everything up and send it back to them to make sure they're okay with it. Just a piece of advice. Don't just go out there and start buying stuff for people. Always get buy off on whatever you're trying to do for somebody. But motherboards. So I think we're locked in on an FX series AMD-ish part, which means you're probably going, you know, at least MATX, but most likely ATX.
Yeah.
Especially if you ever want to run, like, you know, Crossfire in the future. So say you wanted to add another video card instead of buying a whole new video card. You know, you could buy a used video card and run Crossfire, and that's the OpenCL is going to run on both of them. So for editing, it's actually very economic. So really the big thing with motherboards is, especially the AMD chipsets, is, you know, you're going to get SATA 6 on every port. It's really about, you know, do you want to someday do 2-way Crossfire, 3-way Crossfire, 4-way Crossfire? I mean, you get, you know, you go from very like reasonable cost to, you know, this ridiculous, I have a 4, you know, GPU system with crazy.
Realistically, if I ever got to the point where I'd want to add 3 or 4 video cards into the machine, probably going to want to spend to buy a very specific motherboard that's going to be, you know, top of the line at that point in time.
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, 2 at most.
Okay. So that's, you know, there's a lot of good motherboard options out there right now, guys. I tend to focus on, you know, Asus and Gigabyte tend to be my two kind of just go-tos, because they're, you know, 2 of the 3 companies that make the boards themselves. So you're going to get better quality product, in my opinion. I think they're fussier with their own PCB layouts and stuff. So I think we're kind of locked in on CPU, and you know, I'll come up with some motherboard options just in case there's, you know, features on one that aren't on another one, or, you know, power requirements for something that's different. So overclocking is probably the one spot on the motherboard where I would say, you know, if we're going with an air-cooled system and going with an AMD 8-core part, they do overclock okay, but they get really hot when you do it. Right, and at that point, you're just kind of turning electrons into heat for mostly no reason.
Yeah.
So I would say, you know, if there's a board that overclocks reasonably well, like a small overclock, you know, if it's around the same price point as a board that doesn't overclock as well, you'd go with that board, just because, you know, maybe you want to push it 5%, right? And that's, you know, within the noise threshold that you're okay with and the heat threshold that you're okay with, and it gives you that little bit more. But realistically, until you start rendering videos, you won't know what your CPU usage is compared to your GPU usage.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell, like, you know, wow, we bought this, you know, $300 motherboard and we can't use it for overclocking because, yeah, I can overclock it till the cows come home. You know, I get like a 1 gigahertz overclock on it, but I'm bottlenecked on my GPU, right? So
Yeah.
you would have been better off spending money on the GPU. So that kind of brings us back to RAM. So for video editing, well, okay, I'll be honest with you guys. For most everything for RAM anymore, I just buy the cheapest, most reliable 1866 megahertz RAM I can find. Or, you know, 1666, anything that's a good offset of what your motherboard recommends. I wouldn't go with, for editing, I would never go with like 1333 because you'll bottleneck it at the RAM.
Okay.
And if you have dual channel, for editing, it's actually better to go with more individual RAM chips, just because you can utilize the channels a little bit better. But so you want to make sure you at least have both channels filled.
Yeah.
Because then the memory bandwidth is double, which
Yeah.
is, I think almost everybody buys 2 RAM chips anymore.
Yeah.
So you can run with 1 on some motherboards, but that's crazy people talk. So you know, now you need to talk about how much RAM, right?
Yeah.
So I personally, I never recommend less than 8 to anybody anymore.
I was actually thinking of 16 just because of current plans on use case and the fact that I know it's going to go, requirements are going to go up, and so
Yeah.
I might as well buy it now and
Yeah.
plan for it now.
And where I would say here, guys, is, you know, most of the boards have 4 DIMM slots. I'd say 2 8 gig chips. That way you have future growth and not make somebody rebuy. So you always want to think about that. You always want to think about, what am I putting in this PC for somebody, and what am I going to have to, what are they going to have to repurchase, right? If I make a decision, if they want to upgrade it, or then I have to buy a whole new one. So, you know, some people don't want to. Some people just want to throw some more RAM in and not have to replace, you know, like, you'd have to rebuy it all. Nobody likes wasting money. And you know, there's all these videos out here, guys, that are, you know, future-proofing your PC. There is no such thing. You can future-proof your case, kind of, but that's it. So anybody that tells you you're future-proofing your PC is just full of it. You can do things, however, when you make the decisions to buy the parts, that will save money. That's all you can do. You can just look forward and see, and apparently the crow agrees with me, you can look forward and see how you can save somebody money in the future, or yourself.